Criticism and rejection are inevitable. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you refine your skills or shape your character, someone will always find something to criticize. Someone will always have an opinion about you. Some of it fair, some of it completely misguided. And rejection? That's a part of life too. You can't win every time. You won't always get the job, the relationship, or the opportunity. That's reality. The question isn't whether you'll face criticism and rejection, it's how you'll respond when you do. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid it. They shape themselves to fit in, to be liked, to avoid confrontation. They chase approval, thinking that if they're perfect enough, kind enough, accomplished enough, they can somehow avoid the sting of rejection or the weight of criticism. But that's not how life works. You could be the most talented person in the room, and someone will still find a reason to criticize you. You could give your best effort and still face rejection. That's because people's reactions are not about you, they're about them, their own fears, their own insecurities, their own expectations, and you can't control that. What you can control is how you respond. That's where your power lies. You get to decide whether you let criticism define you or refine you. You get to decide whether rejection breaks you or redirects you. That's the difference between those who rise above adversity and those who crumble beneath it. It's not about avoiding the pain, it's about mastering the way you process it. Think about a time you faced harsh criticism. Maybe you poured your heart into a project only to have someone tear it apart. Or maybe you opened up to someone you trusted only to be met with judgment instead of understanding. That feeling of your chest tightening, that rush of defensiveness, that immediate impulse to lash out or shut down, that's natural, it's human, but it's also the moment that defines you. Because in that moment you have a choice. You can let it shake you, you can absorb it, internalize it, and let it convince you that you're not good enough. Or you can step back, take a breath, separate yourself from the words being spoken, and ask yourself, is there truth in this? Is there something I can learn from it? Or is it simply someone else projecting their own limitations onto me? When you treat criticism as information instead of an attack, you reclaim your power. You stop letting other people's opinions control you. You realize that not all criticism is worth absorbing. Some of it is just noise, a reflection of someone else's worldview, rather than a reflection of your worth. The truth is, some people will criticize you no matter what you do. If you succeed, they'll say you got lucky. If you fail, they'll say you never had it in you to begin with. And if you stay in the middle, they'll say you lack ambition. You can't win that game, so stop playing it. Rejection works the same way. Most people treat rejection like a personal failure. They think that if someone says no to a relationship, a job, an opportunity, it means they weren't good enough. But rejection is not a statement of your value. It's just a sign that the path you were on wasn't meant for you. How many times have you been rejected, only to realize later that it was the best thing that could have happened? That job you didn't get freed you up for something better. That person who walked away made space for someone more aligned with you. That opportunity you lost forced you to sharpen your skills so you'd be ready when the right door opened. Rejection is not failure, it's redirection. But you only see that if you stop treating it like an attack. Most people become so consumed with the fear of rejection that they hold themselves back. They stop trying because they don't want to face another no. But when you let rejection define you, you surrender your power. The most successful people aren't the ones who've never been rejected. They're the ones who learn to keep going despite it. This is where real strength comes from. Not from avoiding criticism or rejection, but from mastering your response to it. When you stop seeing criticism as an attack and start seeing it as feedback, you shift the narrative. When you stop treating rejection as a reflection of your worth and start treating it as a course correction, You free yourself. You become untouchable, not because you don't feel the sting, but because you refuse to let it define you. Strength is not immunity to pain. It's the ability to stand tall in the face of it. The next time someone criticizes you, the next time you face rejection, remember this: you are not defined by how others see you. You are defined by how you respond. Criticism and rejection are inevitable, but how you handle them is what sets you apart. Most people live their entire lives trying to be liked. They shape their decisions, their behavior, and even their identity based on what others think. They crave approval and fear rejection because, deep down, they've tied their self-worth to external opinions. When someone compliments them, they feel valuable. When someone criticizes them, they feel worthless. That's why rejection stings so deeply. It's not just about being told no or being overlooked. It feels like a direct attack on your value as a person. But that's an illusion. Your worth has nothing to do with how others see you. It's something you carry within you, and once you realize that, you become unshakable. The problem with depending on external validation is that it makes you vulnerable. If you let praise inflate your sense of worth, you give others the power to destroy it with criticism. If you feel valuable only when others approve of you, you'll spend your life chasing validation and avoiding disapproval. That's exhausting, and worse, it's limiting. Because when you're focused on how others perceive you, you hesitate to take risks, you hold back, you silence yourself, you make safe, comfortable choices because you're terrified of being judged, and in doing so, you limit your growth. You sacrifice authenticity for acceptance. When you detach your self-worth from other people's opinions, you take your power back. You stop living on a roller coaster of emotions driven by other people's reactions. You stop needing praise to feel good about yourself and stop crumbling under criticism. You become steady, grounded. You realize that your value isn't up for debate. It's not something that can be given or taken away. It's intrinsic. It's already there. The moment you stop trying to earn it from others, you set yourself free. It's easy to confuse approval with worth because the world teaches you to seek validation from an early age. You grow up being rewarded for good behavior and corrected for bad behavior. You learn that praise equals value and criticism equals failure. But that's a flawed system. Approval is not a measure of value. It's just a reflection of someone else's perspective, and people's perspectives are shaped by their own experiences, biases, and insecurities. What someone thinks about you often has more to do with them than with you. If someone criticizes you, it might be because they're projecting their own fears onto you. If someone rejects you, it might be because they don't see the bigger picture. That doesn't make you less valuable. It just means they're viewing you through their own limited lens. Think about the most successful people in history. They were all criticized. They were all doubted. They were all rejected at some point. But they didn't let it define them because they knew their worth wasn't tied to acceptance. J.K. Rowling's first Harry Potter manuscript was rejected by 12 publishers. If she had tied her sense of value to that rejection, she would have stopped writing. Instead, she kept going because she knew her worth wasn't determined by whether or not someone recognized her talent. Steve Jobs was fired from his own company. If he had let that rejection define his value, he would have faded into obscurity. But he came back stronger because he knew his value wasn't tied to other people's approval. That's the mindset you need to adopt. You are not defined by whether people like you or whether they approve of you. You are not defined by whether someone hires you, promotes you, or validates you. Your value comes from within. And the moment you stop outsourcing your self-worth to others, you become untouchable. Imagine how much more confident you'd feel if you stopped worrying about what people thought of you. Imagine how much more creative you'd be if you weren't afraid of criticism. Imagine how much more peaceful your life would feel if you weren't constantly chasing approval. That's what happens when you detach from external opinions. But detaching from external opinions doesn't mean ignoring feedback or refusing to listen to others. It means being able to take feedback without it shaking your sense of self. It means being able to hear criticism, evaluate it, and decide if it's useful without letting it damage your confidence. When you stop tying your value to people's reactions, you gain the ability to listen objectively. You can take what's helpful and discard what's not, without taking it personally. This shift in mindset makes you more powerful in every area of life. When you're not desperate for approval, you become more authentic in your relationships. You stop trying to impress people and start showing up as your true self. When you're not afraid of criticism, you take bigger risks in your career and your creative pursuits. You stop playing it safe and start aiming higher because you're no longer terrified of rejection. When you stop needing validation to feel whole, you become a more stable and consistent person. You don't crumble when things don't go your way. You don't chase highs or spiral into lows because your foundation is internal, not external. Criticism and rejection will always exist. You can't control that, but you can control your response. You can decide that your value isn't something that's up for negotiation. You can decide that other people's opinions are just noise, background chatter, and that your worth is something deeper, something permanent. When you internalize that truth, you become unstoppable. Because when you stop seeking value from others, you finally realize that you've had it all along. Criticism is hard to hear. It cuts deep because it feels personal. When someone points out a flaw or questions your work, it's easy to feel attacked, like they're not just criticizing your effort but questioning your value as a person. That's why most people either shut down when they're criticized or go on the defensive. It feels like a threat to your identity. But the truth is, criticism isn't a reflection of your value, it's just feedback, it's information. And once you understand that, you can stop taking it personally and start using it to grow. The problem is that most people tie their self-worth to how others perceive them. If someone compliments you, you feel valuable. If someone criticizes you, you feel like you've failed. But that's a dangerous way to live because it makes you dependent on the ever-changing opinions of others. When your value is tied to approval, you become fragile. One negative comment can unravel your confidence. One harsh opinion can make you question everything you've worked for. That's why it's so important to separate feedback from your sense of identity. Criticism is not an attack, it's a mirror. It reflects back something about your work, your behavior, or your approach. But it's not a statement about your worth as a person. Imagine you're an athlete and your coach gives you tough feedback after a game. They point out the mistakes you made, the areas where you were off, and what you need to improve. Is that criticism an insult? No, it's a tool. It's a roadmap to get better. It's the same with life. When someone gives you feedback, even if it stings, you have a choice. You can take it personally and let it tear you down, or you can look at it as a valuable piece of information that can help you improve. The first step in handling criticism is recognizing that not all feedback is useful, and that's okay. Some criticism is constructive, some is misguided, some comes from people who have no idea what they're talking about, and some comes from people projecting their own fears and insecurities onto you. Your job is not to take all criticism to heart. Your job is to filter it, to ask yourself, is there truth in this? Is there something valuable here that I can use to grow? If the answer is yes, take it, apply it, and grow stronger. If the answer is no, let it go. Don't carry the weight of someone else's opinion if it's not helping you move forward. But even when the criticism is accurate, even when it points out a real flaw, it still doesn't diminish your value, it just shows you where you can improve. That's the difference between confidence and insecurity. Insecurity makes you defensive. It makes you resist feedback because you feel like admitting a mistake equals admitting weakness. Confidence allows you to say, "Yes, I could have done that better," without it shaking your sense of self. When you know your worth, you're not afraid to face your shortcomings because you understand that making mistakes doesn't make you less valuable, it makes you human. Some of the most successful people in the world are where they are because they learned how to handle criticism without letting it define them. They understood that feedback, even harsh feedback, was part of the process of growth. Michael Jordan once said that he failed over and over again, and that's why he succeeded. He didn't take failure or criticism as a sign that he wasn't good enough. He took it as a lesson, adjusted, and kept moving forward. That's the mindset you need to adopt. When someone points out a weakness, don't take it as a personal attack. Take it as a gift. They're showing you a path toward becoming stronger, but you also need to protect yourself from criticism that's not meant to help you. Some people criticize because they're threatened by your growth. They'll try to cut you down because your progress makes them uncomfortable. Some people criticize because they're bitter or jealous. And some people criticize because they are unhappy with their own lives and projecting that onto you. That's why you have to become skilled at discerning between helpful and harmful criticism. Helpful criticism points out real gaps and gives you a chance to improve. Harmful criticism tears you down without offering anything of value. You don't need to absorb that. You don't need to carry that weight. When you stop tying your self-worth to other people's opinions, criticism stops being so painful. It becomes neutral, just data. You can take what's useful and discard the rest. You can stop letting negative feedback make you feel small or insecure because you know it doesn't define you. And the irony is that when you become this secure, when you can handle feedback without getting defensive or discouraged, you become unstoppable. You'll grow faster because you're not wasting energy protecting your ego. You'll take bigger risks because you're not paralyzed by the fear of failure or judgment. You'll achieve more because you're not held back by the need to be perfect. Criticism is feedback, nothing more, nothing less. It's not a measure of your value. It's not a statement about who you are. When you learn to separate feedback from identity, you free yourself. You become more resilient, more confident, and more powerful. That's how you grow. That's how you win. Rejection is one of the most painful experiences we face. It feels personal. It feels like someone is looking at you and saying, "You're not enough." When you don't get the job, when someone you care about walks away, when you put yourself out there and it's met with silence, it cuts deep. It makes you question yourself. What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough? That's the story rejection makes you tell yourself, that you've somehow failed, that you've fallen short. But that's not the truth. Rejection isn't a statement of failure, it's a form of redirection. It's life's way of closing one door so you can find the one you were truly meant to walk through. Think about how many times you've been rejected and, looking back, you realize it was the best thing that could have happened to you. Maybe you didn't get the job you wanted, but that's because a better opportunity was waiting for you. Maybe a relationship ended, but that's because it was making space for the right person to come into your life. In the moment, rejection feels like the end of the road, but more often than not, it's just a course correction, a way of steering you towards something better. The problem is that most people can't see that in the moment. They let rejection define them. They let it break their confidence. They assume that if someone says no, it means they weren't good enough, smart enough, or talented enough. And when you believe that, you start to shrink. You start to hesitate. You start playing small because you don't want to feel that pain again. But rejection only has that power over you if you let it. Rejection is not about your value. It's about alignment. Sometimes you're rejected because the situation wasn't the right fit, not because you're lacking anything. If someone doesn't hire you, it's not necessarily because you weren't qualified. It could be because your strengths are better suited somewhere else. If someone walks away from you, it's not because you're unlovable. It's because they weren't capable of giving you the kind of connection you deserve. Rejection is not a measure of your worth. It's a signal that you're not where you need to be yet. And that's a gift, because when life takes something away, it's often preparing to give you something greater. The truth is, rejection is part of the process. No one succeeds without facing it. No one rises without first falling. But the people who succeed are the ones who understand that rejection isn't personal. It's direct. They don't see no as a wall. They see it as a signpost, pointing them toward a better path. Think about any successful person you admire. They've all faced rejection. Bestseller authors have stacks of rejection letters. Entrepreneurs have been turned down by dozens of investors. Athletes have been cut from teams. Artists have had their work dismissed. But they didn't stop. They didn't internalize that rejection as a statement of their value. They saw it as feedback, as information, and they adjusted course. That's why they made it. The danger isn't in being rejected, it's in letting rejection close you off. It's in deciding that because one person didn't see your value, no one will. It's in deciding that because you failed once, you'll always fail. That's the real damage rejection can cause. Not the rejection itself, but the story you tell yourself about it. The story that says, "You're not enough." That's the story you have to reject. You have to decide that your worth isn't determined by someone else's perception of you. You have to decide that rejection is not the end. It's a step, a necessary step toward where you're really meant to be. The most painful rejections in life are often the most valuable, because they force you to grow. They force you to face yourself and ask, "What now?" They push you to develop resilience. They sharpen you. They strengthen you. And most importantly, they teach you that you are more than the outcome. You are not the rejection letter. You are not the breakup. You are not the missed opportunity. You are what you do next. When you stop seeing rejection as failure and start seeing it as feedback, you strip it of its power. You stop being afraid of hearing no because you realize that no isn't the end. It's a redirection. Imagine how much more courageous you would be if you stopped fearing rejection. Imagine how much more you would pursue if you weren't terrified of being told no. What if you knew that every rejection was just another step toward alignment, toward finding the right opportunity, the right person, the right path? That's the shift that changes everything. When you stop taking rejection personally and start seeing it as redirection, you become unstoppable. You stop hesitating. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop playing small. Because you know that even if you get rejected, you'll be fine. Better than fine. You'll be one step closer to where you're really meant to be. So when rejection comes, and it will, don't shrink. Don't take it as a statement of your value. Take it as information. Take it as feedback. Take it as redirection. Because that's what it is. Every no is creating space for the right yes. Every closed door is making way for the one that's meant to open. You just have to trust the process. You just have to keep going. The path isn't always clear, but rejection is often life's way of lighting the way forward. You just have to have the courage to keep walking. Freedom is not found in the approval of others. It's not in their validation or acceptance. True freedom comes when you let go of the need for approval altogether. Most people spend their entire lives chasing acceptance, trying to fit in, trying to be liked, trying to avoid criticism. They mold themselves into shapes they think will please others. They bite their tongues, they shrink their opinions, they soften their edges. all because they're terrified of being judged or rejected. But the price of that approval is your peace. When you make other people's opinions the measure of your value, you hand over control of your life. You become a prisoner to their expectations, constantly adjusting yourself to avoid conflict, constantly walking on eggshells to keep the peace. That's not freedom, that's bondage. The problem with seeking approval is that it's never enough. Even when you get it, it's temporary. You might get the praise, the likes, the applause, but it fades, and then you're left chasing it again. It's like drinking salt water. It might satisfy you for a moment, but it leaves you even more thirsty. And the worst part is that even when you do everything right, even when you work hard to meet everyone's expectations, someone will still criticize you. Someone will still find fault. That's the trap of approval. It's a game you can't win, because no matter how hard you try, you will never please everyone. And the harder you try, the more you lose yourself in the process. Letting go of the need for approval doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It means you stop letting their opinions define you. It means you stop looking to others for permission to live your life. It means you start trusting yourself more than you trust the crowd. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop seeking approval, when you realize that your worth isn't tied to how others perceive you. When you stop needing to be liked, you become dangerous in the best way. You become someone who can speak the truth without fear, someone who can make bold decisions without hesitation, someone who can stand alone without feeling abandoned, because you understand that your value isn't on the line. Approval is a gift, not a requirement. And when you stop needing it, you become unstoppable. Think about how many decisions in your life have been shaped by the fear of what other people would think. How many times have you hesitated because you were worried about being judged? How many opportunities have you walked away from because you didn't want to face rejection? How many conversations have you avoided because you didn't want to upset someone? That's the way of approval. It makes you second-guess yourself. It makes you doubt your instincts. It makes you choose comfort over growth. And the crazy part is, even when you play it safe, even when you avoid conflict, even when you do everything right, people will still find something to criticize. That's why freedom comes not from being liked. When you let go of the need for approval, you start making decisions based on your values instead of other people's expectations. You stop compromising your integrity to keep the peace. You stop betraying yourself to avoid discomfort. You stop needing to explain yourself. You simply live honestly and unapologetically. There's a deep kind of confidence that comes from knowing that you don't need anyone else's permission to exist as you are. It's not arrogance, it's freedom. You stop trying to be everything to everyone, and instead you start focusing on being true to yourself. And the irony is, when you stop needing approval, people tend to respect you more. When you stop seeking validation, you become someone others admire, not because you're trying to please them, but because you're standing firm in your own truth. The truth is, most people who criticize you are projecting their own insecurities. They're judging you from their own limited perspective. When someone says, "You're not good enough," what they're really saying is, "I'm not comfortable with who I am." When someone says, "You can't do that," what they're really saying is, "I don't believe I could do that." They're about them. And when you stop taking it personally, when you stop internalizing their criticism as truth, you free yourself. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop watering yourself down to avoid conflict. You stop apologizing for being who you are. Letting go of the need for approval isn't easy. It takes strength. It takes trust. But once you stop letting other people's opinions dictate your sense of self-worth, you become light. You stop carrying the weight of their expectations. You stop contorting yourself to fit their idea of who you should be. You start living with integrity, with honesty, with courage. You start making decisions not to please others, but because they align with your truth. That's where peace comes from. That's where confidence comes from. That's where freedom comes from. When you stop chasing approval, you find clarity. You know who you are. You know what matters to you. You stop wasting energy trying to win over people who were never meant to understand you. You stop giving your power away to people who were never meant to hold it. And most importantly, you start living for yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in an authentic way. You start leading your life with strength and purpose because you're no longer tied to the shifting opinions of others. And that's real freedom. Not needing to be liked, but choosing to stand tall anyway. That's when you become truly unstoppable.